In 1095, one speech ignited a holy war. Pope Urban II urged Christian knights to march for Jerusalem, promising the forgiveness of all sins. What followed was 2 centuries of brutal battles and legendary figures that forever changed the Christian and Islamic worlds. This is the story of the Crusader Wars. So, to get why the Crusades even happened, we have to rewind and look at the world of the 11th century. For centuries, Christian pilgrims had traveled to the Holy Land. Even though the region had been under Muslim rule since the 7th century, these journeys were usually tolerated. But the political landscape was shifting violently. A new power, the Seljuk Turks, had surged out of Central Asia, conquering huge territories. They had crushed the armies of the Byzantine Empire, the great Christian power of the East, and taken control of most of Anatolia, the land we now call Turkey. The Byzantine Emperor, Alexios I Komnenos, staring down annihilation, sent a desperate plea to the West. He asked Pope Urban II for military aid, hoping for a few elite mercenary knights to help push the Turks back. Alexios probably never imagined what would happen next. Pope Urban saw a much grander opportunity. He saw a chance to heal the great schism between the Eastern and Western churches, to assert his own power over kings, and to redirect the violent energy of Europe's knights toward a common enemy. At the Council of Clermont in November 1095, he took that simple request for mercenaries and turned it into a call for a holy war, an armed pilgrimage to free Jerusalem itself. He spoke of attacks on Christians and defiled holy sites, urging the knights of France to stop fighting each other and start fighting for Christ. The Pope's call for a crusade sparked an almost hysterical response across Europe. But the first to leave weren't the noble armies. In spring 1096, a chaotic mob called the People's Crusade, led by Peter the Hermit, set out. Mostly peasants, ill-equipped and undisciplined, they wreaked havoc across Europe and were swiftly annihilated in Asia Minor by the Turks. The real force, the Prince's Crusade, left later that year, led by Europe's great lords, Godfrey of Bouillon, the devout Duke of Lower Lorraine, Bohemond of Taranto, the cunning Italian, and Raymond IV of Toulouse, wealthy and powerful. They gathered 4 main armies outside Constantinople. Emperor Alexios, shocked by their size, made them swear to return any conquered lands before ferrying them across the Bosphorus. Their first major target was Nicaea, the Seljuk capital, which fell in June 1097 with Byzantine help. At the Battle of Dorylaeum, the Crusaders were ambushed, but reinforcements helped them secure a crucial victory, opening the path through Anatolia. The hardest test was the Siege of Antioch, Oct 1097, June 1098. The city seemed impregnable, and Crusaders suffered from starvation and disease. The siege ended through betrayal. Bohemond struck a deal with a tower guard, allowing the Crusaders to enter on June 3, 1098. After a brutal massacre, they were besieged again by a massive Muslim relief army under Kerboga. In despair, a monk, Peter Bartholomew, claimed to find the Holy Lance, which inspired the Crusaders to break the siege and defeat Kerboga's larger army. Finally, they marched to Jerusalem, reaching its walls in June 1099. After a 5-week siege, Godfrey of Bouillon's men broke through on July 15th. What followed was one of the most infamous massacres of the Middle Ages. Thousands of Muslim and Jewish inhabitants were slaughtered. Against all odds, the First Crusade succeeded. Godfrey became the first ruler of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, choosing the title Defender of the Holy Sepulchre instead of king. So, the First Crusade worked. But what now? The victory left the Christians with a long, narrow strip of land along the coast. To hold it, they set up 4 feudal states, known together as Outremer, which is French for overseas. These were the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Tripoli, and the most powerful of all, the Kingdom of Jerusalem. These states were a strange creation, a tiny European Catholic ruling class trying to govern a diverse local population of Eastern Christians, Muslims, and Jews. They were essentially Frankish islands in a vast Muslim sea, and they were under constant threat. To survive, they needed a permanent military. This need led to one of the most iconic inventions of the era, the military orders. Around 1119, a few knights led by Hugues de Payan pledged to protect pilgrims on the dangerous roads to Jerusalem. They were given a base near the ruins of Solomon's Temple, and so they became known as the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, or as we know them, the Knights Templar. They were soon joined by the Knights of the Hospital of St. John, or the Hospitallers. The Hospitallers started out as a charity running a hospital for sick pilgrims, but they had to militarize just to defend their patients. These were warrior monks, bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, who became the elite, professional soldiers of the Crusader States. They garrisoned incredible castles, like the spectacular Crac des Chevaliers, that were the backbone of Outremer's defense. For a while, the system held, but the Muslim world, which had been fractured and disorganized, was starting to unite. The counter-crusade was about to begin. The turning point came in 1144. The formidable Turkish ruler Imad ad-Din Zengi, the Atabeg of Mosul and Aleppo, launched a surprise attack on the northernmost Crusader state, the county of Edessa. The city fell. Its loss sent shockwaves across Europe. It was the first Crusader state to be founded, and now it was the first to be lost. In response, Pope Eugenius III called for a new crusade. This time, the call was answered not just by nobles, but by the most powerful men in Europe. The Second Crusade was the first to be led by reigning kings, Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany. Their involvement raised expectations to an incredible high. Surely, with the might of two great kingdoms, Edessa would be retaken. But the Second Crusade was an absolute disaster from start to finish. The German and French armies marched separately, and both were plagued by poor discipline and a deep mistrust of the Byzantines they passed on the way. Conrad's army was torn apart by the Seljuks in Anatolia. Louis's army also took heavy losses. The battered remnants of their forces finally reached Jerusalem in 1148. There, in a council with the local lords, they made a catastrophic decision. Instead of attacking Zengi's son and successor, Nur al-Din, the man who actually held Edessa, they decided to attack Damascus. This was a baffling choice. Damascus had often been a rival to Zengi and sometimes even an ally of Jerusalem. The attack alienated their only potential Muslim ally in the region. The siege was a mess and collapsed in just 4 days. Humiliated, the kings went home. The crusade had achieved nothing except weakening the Crusader states and shattering the image of Crusader invincibility. After the Second Crusade's failure, Nur al-Din strengthened his rule, but his Kurdish general, Salah al-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known as Saladin, would become the Crusaders' greatest enemy. By 1186, Saladin had united Muslim Egypt and Syria, fully encircling the Crusader states. The breaking point came in 1187. After a provocation by the hot-headed Crusader lord Raynald de Chatillon, Saladin invaded the Kingdom of Jerusalem. King Guy de Lusignan led about 20,000 Crusaders to relieve Tiberias on July 3rd, but Saladin harassed them mercilessly, denying water in the scorching heat. On July 4th, near the Horns of Hattin, the exhausted Crusader army was surrounded and annihilated. The Battle of Hattin was catastrophic. Raynald de Chatillon was executed, captured Templars and Hospitallers were slaughtered, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem collapsed. City after city surrendered until October 2, 1187, when Saladin entered Jerusalem, ending 88 years of Christian rule. Europe was horrified. Pope Gregory VIII called the Third Crusade, led by the Crusade of Kings, Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, Philip II of France, and Richard I, the Lionheart of England. Disaster struck early. Frederick drowned crossing a river in Anatolia, and most of his army returned home. Philip and Richard captured the crucial port of Acre after a grueling 2-year siege in July 1191. Soon after, Philip returned to France, leaving Richard in sole command. A brilliant commander, Richard won at the Battle of Arsuf and marched within sight of Jerusalem, twice. Yet he realized he couldn't hold the city. With his supply lines stretched and England under threat, he negotiated a truce with Saladin in September 1192. The treaty left the coastal Crusader states intact and guaranteed safe passage for Christian pilgrims to Jerusalem. The Third Crusade had prevented total annihilation of the Crusader states, but failed to retake the Holy City. After the high drama of the Third Crusade, the crusading movement lost focus and its soul. The Fourth Crusade, called by Pope Innocent III to attack Egypt, went disastrously wrong. Needing transport, the Crusaders hired Venice, but couldn't pay in full. The cunning Venetian Doge, Enrico Dandolo, hijacked the expedition. First, they attacked the Christian city of Zara, then got tangled in Byzantine politics, and finally, in April 1204, they sacked Constantinople, the greatest Christian city, without ever reaching the Holy Land. This permanently deepened the schism between Catholic and Orthodox Christianity. Later, crusades were a string of failures. The Fifth Crusade bogged down in Egypt. The Seventh and Eighth Crusades, both led by the devout King Louis IX of France, also ended in defeat, with Louis dying of disease on the second attempt. Meanwhile, a new power rose in Egypt, the Mamluks, originally Turkic slave soldiers. By 1250, under Sultan Baybars, they systematically destroyed the remaining Crusader states. Baybars, a military genius who had defeated both Louis IX and the Mongols, captured key cities and castles one by one: Arsuf, Saft, Jaffa, Antioch, 1268, and the legendary Crac des Chevaliers, 1271. By then, the Crusaders were confined to a few coastal cities filled with refugees. The final blow came in 1291. The Mamluk Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil besieged Acre, the last Crusader capital. With over 100,000 Mamluks against fewer than 15,000 defenders, the siege lasted 6 weeks. On May 18th, the Mamluks breached the walls, chaos ensued, and the last Crusader forces were defeated. The King of Jerusalem fled, and with the fall of Acre, the Crusader States in the Holy Land came to an end. And with the fall of Acre in 1291, the Crusader era finally came to an end. Nearly 2 centuries of holy wars, brutal battles, and legendary figures reshaped history forever. If you enjoyed this complete Crusader Wars timeline, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more epic history documentaries. Comment below, who do you think had the greatest impact on the Crusades, and why? See you in the next chapter of history.